Hello and welcome. You're watching Nothing But the Truth. A London-based website called www.bosefiles.info has assembled and published revealing details of Subhash Chandra Bose's last days, including eyewitness accounts of how and when he died. The website claims this is overwhelming and irrefutable evidence that Bose unquestionably met with a plane crash at Taipei on the 18th of August 1945 and died of his injuries shortly thereafter. These findings will be conclusive for some, but for others they will viciously stir an old controversy. Tonight, to share with us the evidence he has and why he believes this conclusive, is the journalist who's established the website and spent 25 years investigating the truth about Bose's death. His name is Ashis Ray, and he joins us from London. Ashis Ray, before we come to the dramatic revelations made by our website, both today and earlier, let's talk about the website itself. It's called www.bosefiles.info, and the aim, as you put it, is to chronicle the truth about what happened to Subhash Chandra Bose. What made you set it up?
I was noticing in recent times, and disappointingly, that the untruth was rampant in India, and not only that, the untruth was causing havoc. So it was about time to reveal and reconfirm the truth.
Now, I gather 25 years of investigation and research has gone into the task of establishing the truth about the last days of Subhash Chandra Bose. Give me an idea of the range and spread of material and resources you've accessed.
I started this work in 1990. It took me to Taiwan, where the first inquiry that took place under Shahnawaz Khan did not visit because there was no diplomatic relationship between India and Taiwan. It took me to Japan, it took me to the Soviet Union, to Pakistan, to the United States, and of course to the National Archives in Britain and the British Library.
So do you believe you've got access to material that many people have never seen before?
In some cases, I've got access to material not seen by the public at all. Some scholars may have had access to such material, but that's about all.
Now, Ashis Ray, your website says the conclusion you've come to is the following, and once again I'm going to quote you. There is overwhelming, irrefutable, hard documentary evidence to reconfirm that Subhash Bose unquestionably met with a plane crash at Taipei on the 18th of August 1945. For several members of Bose's family, this will be deeply divisive and extremely controversial. Before we discuss how you come to this conclusion, are you prepared for the controversy you inevitably have created?
First of all, I see no reason for controversy, because when the truth, indisputably evidence, which is hard evidence, is staring you staggeringly on your face, I think there's no reason for controversy.
Nonetheless, there is bound to be some, so are you prepared for it?
I don't know whether there will be controversy. What I can say is that I would like to congratulate people who have been demanding declassification of files by the government of India, and their campaign is about to see fruition. I would also like to say that I sympathize with the sentiments of people who do not believe in the crash or haven't believed in the crash so far.
Okay.
The reason is simple.
Let's then come at that point to the details about Bose's last days as established by your website. First of all, you've established that Bose was in Malaya when he heard that Japan had offered to surrender. That was on the 12th of August 1945. He then returned to Singapore, where he learned that the Japanese were prepared to give him shelter in Japan. And on the 16th of August, he began the journey that was intended to take him to Tokyo. In the first stage, you say, he got to Bangkok. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, I think what the Japanese were telling Subhash Bose is that his situation in Southeast Asia was becoming insecure, and therefore they wanted to move him away to East Asia and ideally to Japan. And this was first conveyed to him in Singapore, and then when he went from Singapore to Bangkok, it was reiterated to him. So a plan was devised that he would go to Japan, but his ambition was really to go away and disappear, perhaps, into the Soviet Union. Because he felt that Japan would not be able to give him protection, because Japan had surrendered in the war unconditionally, and very soon the Allied forces would enter Japan. So he felt that although he might be detained in the Soviet Union, he still had a better chance of convincing the Soviet authorities that his was a mission to liberate India and thereby take his mission forward.
Now, as you say in your website, in Bangkok it was decided that though Subhash Bose would go to Tokyo to thank the Japanese government for all the assistance they had given him, thereafter he would proceed to Russia via Manchuria. That was the critical decision taken on or around the 16th of August when he was in Bangkok. Is that right?
Yes, discussions between Japanese officials and Subhash Bose reached this decision that he would go to Tokyo to thank the Japanese government for the help that they had given him during his campaign of 2 years between 1943 and 1945, notably to the campaign of the Indian National Army that he had formed in Southeast Asia. And thereafter, he would go to Manchuria, and from Manchuria to the Soviet Union.
Now, on the 17th of August, Bose left Bangkok, reaching Saigon by midday. Unfortunately, when he reached Saigon, there were no planes available in Saigon to take him further. What happened next?
What you say is absolutely correct. He arrived in Saigon from Bangkok, and there were no planes available to take him further east and to Japan. Ultimately, of course, after several hours of negotiations between his aides and Japanese officials, the Japanese offered 2 seats in a bomber which was going to Tokyo on a hopping flight. And they said that we can offer you just 2 seats. There were several of his aides with him in Saigon, and initially Subhash Bose was reluctant to accept this offer. But he was persuaded by his own people that he should accept this offer, and so he decided that he will take his ADC, Colonel Habibur Rahman, with him.
Also, that flight was overloaded, I believe, and Bose had to discard part of his baggage containing books and clothes to enable the flight to take off. Is that right?
That is correct, that Subhash Bose had to overload his books, his clothes, and lighten the aircraft, if you like. Others too had to do the same thing, but he was asked to do so, and he obliged.
Now, that same evening, and we're still talking about the 17th of August 1945, somewhere between 5 and 5:30 p.m., you say, Bose took off from Saigon, supposedly for Taipei, but the pilot made an unscheduled night stop at Touraine on the Indo-China coast. You say Bose spent the night at a hotel, and it was probably Hotel Morin. How do you know this?
Hotel Morin is what is cited in the Shahnawaz Khan Netaji Inquiry Committee. That is the hotel which was the likeliest to have been his resting place for that night. I should add that Touraine, which is today known as Da Nang, is part of Vietnam. And it was an unscheduled stop because the entire day had passed in Saigon with the negotiations, and so the flight took off quite late, 5:30, as you rightly said, and therefore they decided to halt there overnight before continuing their journey.
Now, on the 18th of August, which is the next day, and which is also the day Subhash Chandra Bose is supposed to have died, you say he took off early in the morning from Touraine, and there were 12 or 13 other passengers, plus the crew on the plane. The plane flew straight to Taipei. But there in Taipei, concerns arose about one of the engines of the plane. Tell me about that.
In actual fact, there were about 13, 14 people on board, including the crew. And they took off. It was a lovely day, apparently, bright sunshine. It was all clear. And it took off from Touraine. By the way, in Touraine, they had further lightened the aircraft. This needs to be pointed out because there were anti-aircraft guns in that plane, and 12 of them were offloaded, thereby reducing the weight of the aircraft by 600 kilos.
Okay.
So it went, and instead of a scheduled stop at Haitou, it continued right up to Taipei.
But when it got to Taipei, they had concerns about one of the engines of the plane. Tell me about that concern about the engine.
Yes, while they were stopping there, it was a refueling stop at Taipei, and the passengers had been taken away to a marquee, a sort of shamiana for sandwiches, and they were putting fuel into the aircraft. It was noticed that the left engine was not working properly. And so they looked into this, they slowed it down, they did some fine-tuning, and ultimately the pilot, the ground engineer, as well as the flight engineer were satisfied that the engine was functioning properly.
Now, your website has a lot of detail about what happened next when the plane took off from Taipei for Tokyo, and then very soon after takeoff crashed. Share some of those details with us.
Yes, there were approximately 7 survivors. So half the people on that aircraft died either instantaneously or soon afterwards, and 7 survived. And we have the accounts of 6 of the 7, and they say that as soon as the aircraft took off, it had risen to only about 30, 40, 50 meters maximum when there was this loud explosion, which Colonel Habibur Rahman describes like a cannon shot, and the left propeller broke, fell off, and the aircraft nosedived into the ground on the outskirts of that airfield in Taipei.
You also have details on your website about how badly injured, how badly burnt Subhash Chandra Bose was as a result of the crash. Share some of those details with us.
Colonel Habibur Rahman's description, which is the best, I would imagine, because he was sitting right behind Subhash Bose in the aircraft, is that when the plane went down, Netaji was sitting close to the oil tanker, and he was wearing cotton khakis as opposed to woolens being worn by Colonel Habibur Rahman. And so it is Rahman's suspicion that petrol fell on his clothes, and as he was racing out of the aircraft, running out of it through the fire, his clothes caught fire much more than it did in the case of others, and certainly in the case of Colonel Rahman himself. And therefore, when they got out of the plane, he found, Colonel Rahman did, that Netaji was virtually in flames. The upper part of his body, his jacket was completely on fire, his head had burned severely, and he also had a brutal injury on his forehead.
You say that Bose gave his ADC Colonel Habibur Rahman at that point when he was badly injured and probably still on fire, an important message for his countrymen in India. What was that message?
Well, it was words to the effect that I don't think I'm going to survive. He was lying there on the ground near the aircraft, and he said that I think I'm badly injured. I don't think I'm going to survive. He asked Habibur Rahman, how about you? And Habib said that I think I'm all right. But then Bose told him that go and tell my countrymen that I fought till the last.
Now, finally, your website also has evidence that seems to prove that after the crash, Bose died at the Nanmon Military Hospital in Taipei. First, a gentleman called Captain Yoshimi, the medical officer in charge of the hospital, has given an account of Bose's last hours. What has he said?
Dr. Yoshimi was the chief medical officer at the hospital. Bose was rushed to that hospital not far from the airfield. I have visited both places, by the way, myself, and there Dr. Yoshimi took charge of his treatment, and he said that he came in a very serious condition, and he did his best. He applied all the measures that could possibly have been applied at that point of time, but later that evening he passed away.
You also on your website say that a certain Dr. Suruta, a Japanese doctor at the hospital, gave evidence to a British intelligence inquiry ordered by Lord Mountbatten in 1946. What did Dr. Suruta say about Bose's death?
Dr. Suruta corroborated what Dr. Yoshimi had said. Effectively, Dr. Suruta was a junior doctor in the hospital, and he too was part of the team that was treating Subhash Bose. And so he too was there, very much there, and in fact, he says that he came back from his dinner break and he sat next to the bed where Subhash Bose was lying, and Bose asked him, are you going to be here for the rest of the night? And he said yes, but then his condition started deteriorating, and later that evening, later that night, he passed away.
So is it possible that Dr. Suruta was actually there in the room when Subhash Bose died?
There were 5 people in the room at least, and all 5 have given their eyewitness first-hand accounts. It is overwhelming. It is absolutely irrefutable. There was Dr. Yoshimi, there was Dr. Suruta, there was interpreter Nakamura, there was, of course, Colonel Habibur Rahman, and there was a nurse, Chan P. Shah.
In fact, finally, in September 1946, a gentleman called Harin Shah, a journalist with Free Press Journal, visited Taipei and spoke to that Taiwanese nurse who looked after Bose at the hospital and who you said a moment ago was present in the room when Bose died. What did the nurse tell Harin Shah?
Exactly what the 2 doctors had said, that she was there, she was asked to apply olive oil to his body by the doctors, and she was with the doctors treating him throughout till he passed away. So this was a very, very telling account, because if you remember, the first inquiry team that went to Japan to investigate the matter under Major General Shahnawaz Khan, they did not go to Taiwan. So the evidence of this nurse, which was again very important because it was yet another first-hand eyewitness account, was not obtained. So this intrepid Indian journalist, and in those days the Free Press Journal was a very important newspaper in Mumbai, and Harin Shah visited Taipei, spoke to a lot of people, not just the nurse, who had first-hand accounts to tell about the crash and then whatever happened after the crash.
So to sum up this critical point about the actual death of Subhash Bose late at night on the 18th of August as a result of that crash that had happened earlier in Taipei, you're saying to me that 5 people at least were present in the room when he died, and 3 of those people, Captain Yoshimi, Dr. Suruta, and the Taiwanese nurse, have given credible evidence that proves irrefutably that Bose did die, because they were there, they were treating him, and they witnessed his death.
All 5, I would say, have given credible evidence which is indisputable, because Mr. Nakamura, who was the interpreter, had known Bose from earlier visits. In fact, whenever Subhash Bose visited Taiwan, he would act as interpreter. So he was not only there as interpreter, but somebody who could positively identify for the doctors and for the nurse that this was indeed Subhash Bose. And Nakamura goes on to say that when he passed away, when he breathed his last, everyone stood up, the Japanese officers, and saluted the body.
Now, as I said earlier, you believe all of this adds up to, and once again I'm quoting you, overwhelming, irrefutable, hard documentary evidence that Bose unquestionably met with a plane crash at Taipei on the 18th of August 1945 and hours later died succumbing to his wounds and serious injuries. No doubt, and this is a fact, Bose's daughter Anita Pfaff accepts this, but as you know, large sections of Bose's Indian family don't. How do you think they will respond to what you call irrefutable evidence which you've made available over the last few days, the last chunk of which becomes available today? How will Bose's dissenting Indian family respond?
I hope Bose's extended family who live in India welcome what I have done, and they accept the evidence which I have presented now in the public domain. I can well understand that because of their emotional attachment to Subhash Bose, they've been in denial over the years. It's a matter of sentiment, which I respect fully. But at the end of the day, I think we need to confront the truth, because this is the truth, nothing but the truth.
Now, Bose's daughter, Anita Pfaff, has suggested, and she suggested this quite a while ago, that a DNA test should be done on the remains which are said to be her father's remains at the Renkoji temple in Tokyo. Do you think that that would be the best way of resolving this issue? Because if those remains after a DNA test conclusively turn out to be Bose's remains, that would prove that he died, and that he died in an air crash in Taipei.
I totally support Professor Anita Pfaff's suggestion. If I may say so, I made this proposal precisely more than 20 years ago, that a DNA test should be done, because that will resolve the mystery and the suspicion once and for all. It will be a scientific test. 20 years ago, the technology of DNA was such that there were some doubts whether the remains from a cremation would determine whether they belong to a certain person or not. But today, 20 years later, I'm convinced that this test will absolutely determine one way or the other whether those ashes, those remains at Renkoji Temple, Tokyo, are Subhash Bose's or not, and thereby end the controversy.
This is such an obvious, logical step to take. Do you wonder why it hasn't been taken already?
When I proposed this in 1995, Subhash Bose's wife, Emilia Schenkel, was still alive, and the proposal was taken to her and to her daughter Anita, but at that time they were hesitant. I can understand that. I again respect their views, because at the end of the day, although Emilia Schenkel is no more, the only person legally who has locus standi in the matter is Professor Anita Pfaff. She is the only child, she is the only heir, and therefore her views are important. And I would wholly support any suggestion, any move on her part to carry out a DNA test. This test, by the way, has to be done with the approval of the Japanese government and the Indian government. But it is time that the two governments and the priest at the temple got together and saw that this was the way forward, and this was the way to end the controversy once and for all. Because
wait, I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm going to interrupt you there, because we're running out of time, and I need you to confirm one thing for me, and I need you to confirm it with a simple yes or no. Am I right in the belief that Anita Pfaff, Bose's daughter, is in favor of a DNA test being done to those remains, which are supposed to be Bose's remains in the Renkoji temple? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
And there, I'm afraid, Ashis Ray, we're going to have to end this. Thank you very much for this interview. Thank you very much for making public on this program the details that you've amassed together over the last 25 years, which you believe conclusively and irrefutably prove, A, that Bose died in a plane crash on the 18th of August 1945, and B, that the best way of ascertaining that would be to now test for DNA the remains that are supposed to be his, which have been kept at the Renkoji temple in Tokyo. My thanks to you for giving us this interview. And there we end this particular show. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.